I'm Iza Hussin. I'm a political scientist and the Mohamed Noah Fellow in Asian Politics here at Pembroke College. I teach in Politics and International Studies and in the Human, Social and Political Sciences tripos. And when I teach undergraduates, I teach a course called The Politics of Asia, which considers politics and state formation in South and Southeast Asia. And at the undergraduate level, I also teach in a course called The Politics of the Middle East in the non-Arabic speaking, non-Middle Eastern parts of the Muslim world. So Indonesia, Malaysia, Turkey, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. At the graduate level, I teach politics and religion and also comparative politics courses on law, society, and Asia. So my research and my writing has generally, over the last few years, been focused on a project called The Politics of Islamic Law, which considers the making of the category of Islamic law today as a historical and politically contextualized project. And so I ask three basic sets of questions about the contemporary category of Islamic law, and the first of which has to do with its historical makings as a category of law and state intervention in India, Malaya, and Egypt. And so the first of the targets of the politics of Islamic law was to consider colonialism not as a project purely of imposition, but as a negotiated political context within which Muslim elites found ways to articulate a domain of sovereignty for themselves over what then becomes the private arena of religion and religious observance. The second target area of the politics of Islamic law was also to consider the ways in which what we now think of as the complements, the natural complements of the modern nation state, enforcement of the law, legislation, a sort of modern institutional array of courts, dispute resolution, policy making, come into being in India, Malaya, and Egypt at the same time as Islamic law is being articulated as a domain of state governance, and also one of the reasons for being for the colonial state itself. And the third of these sort of areas of inquiry for the book was to think about Islamic law not as a pure emanation from the pre-modern period and from text, but as a continual, contested, and circulating category of state intervention. And so the work of the politics of Islamic law is also to consider the very important role that British India plays, not only in the colonial imaginary, but in the imaginary of the states that come to be built over colonial British imperialism, so Pakistan, Egypt, Malaysia, for example, and the ways in which colonial institutions then move from one of these arena to others in the governance of Muslims and Muslim politics. So I came to writing this dissertation in political science as a classical comparative political scientist. So three case studies: India, Malaysia, Egypt, compare, contrast. But what ended up happening was, as I went into the archives, I started to see people, agents, and institutions move from one place to another. Ideas percolate not only through space, but also through time. And so my next project is more centrally focused on how institutions, ideas, and agents travel, and seeks to understand how ideas move from one place to another through the law, how law becomes not only a universalizing but also a deeply localizing institution, and how we might rethink the late 19th century as a moment of creative and experimental lawmaking in the shadow of imperialism, and a moment that really hasn't quite been revisited since. And so the next few years will be based in archives in Asia as well as in the Pacific, in Hawaii, and on the continent as well, to try and think about the materiality and the language and the sort of dynamics of translation through which law travels.